Okay, so in this section, I'm going to go through the process of creating a simple game object. We're going to texture it and then bring it into Unity. So now you can see here I've got the folder that I'm working from for this entire project. I've called it My Game Project. You would call it something sensible. It's the name of your entire game project. Inside this folder, I've got our main game project. This is the Unity project. So JMC 3D Platformer is the name of this. And we can see this is a Unity project, so we know that assets folder, that's where all of our content is. This is the Corgi Engine 3D platformer that we're updating with just a few of our own basic graphics. In here I've got a folder called Maya. It's just a nice easy way to name it and keep track of everything. I've got another folder called Completed Assets, which is also empty. And this is where I'm going to put everything that's finished that I just want to be able to take directly from there into my game when I'm ready. So the first step is I need to tell Maya that this is the folder that we're working with. So I've launched Maya, and before I do anything, I'm going into File, Set Project, and I'm just saying on the desktop I've got this project just to keep it clean on the desktop. And this is where I want Maya to think of all of the project folders. So all I'm doing is clicking that folder and going Set. It's telling me it doesn't have a workspace. So that just means it doesn't have the workspace.mel file in there. And I go create default workspace. And so what we can see now is inside of this Maya folder, it's created a workspace. So Maya now recognizes this folder as a project. What that allows me to do is if I go ahead and model something, so I've got a cube, something in my scene, when I save it, file save scene as, Maya gives us two formats, by the way. I like to change it to ASCII. I just find it slightly safer, slightly more resilient to corruption. Only slightly, it's just a personal preference. When I save it, you can see in my workspace root, I'm in desktop, my game project, Maya. So it's taking me straight to this location, which is really useful. Now this is just a Maya scene, so I don't need to think about what this asset's going to be called in-game. But what's the name of this particular scene, this project? Well, what I'm making is a ramp. So I'm going to call it ramp01. Get out of the habit of putting spaces in your naming as game developers. We need to be very particular of best practice. So ramp01, save. So we can see ramp01. I'm going to make a very simple object. Now in Maya, the grid is set to single unit is a centimeter, so this is a 1 by 1 centimeter unit, and all I'm going to do is a very, very simple model of just make it a basic ramp. I just want a little bit of a extended piece, grabbing this edge, dragging it down, and what I might actually do is just merge these verts. So I'll go into vertex mode, just jump over to my modeling toolkit and select target weld, and I'm just going to grab these verts and drag them down. Hit Q to get out of that target weld tool, and that's about all I want. Pretty simple, but that gives us a platform for the character to run up. I might just make it a slightly less steep angle just to be safe and keep it simple. So we could obviously do much more complex things, but you know, the whole point of this video is just to show you the workflow, what you need to follow. You can try more complex things later. So I've made my model. Our standard practice, Maya builds up history. So we always want to get rid of that. So edit, delete all history. So we don't have any history there. I'm going to change to UV mode. So UV editing in the workspace. So this pull down menu. UV editing. Can't tell if it's a good unwrap or not because I can't see the checkers. I have to turn those on in order to see that we've got a terrible unwrap. It's very stretched. My favorite workflow for unwrapping, I'm just going to turn on this graphic. It gives me the slider. It's just, I find it much easier on the eye to see it a little darker. And it's easier to see the edges on your model. So my favorite workflow for unwrapping, which I find very simple and streamlined, is essentially a three-step process. We always want to start by projecting. So UV, and I'm going camera based. So that projects new UVs onto our model with no seams. You can see how this is a 3D object and this is a 2D object, how they relate. It's just projected it from that perspective camera. It looks great from this angle, but as I orbit around, of course, we see a lot of stretching. So that's the first step, projecting. The next step is to cut where we think we need UVs. And the best tool for that is UV 3D cut and sew. Now we want to make sure we're in edge mode. When I hold down the right mouse, my image changes. I don't have edges, verts, faces. What I need to do here, holding down the right mouse, is go up to Component and then go up to Edge. Now my first selection, if I just click, it doesn't cut. What it's looking for is a complete continuous cut. So if I select one and then holding down Shift in order to add to my selection, I'm just going around and selecting, oops, misclicked there, selecting all of the edges, so it's a continuous selection. And now if I hit X, the X key to cut, it cuts that because it's a continuous selection. And I can do the same here. I can hit X, just click on those, so basically taking from an existing cut and continue upwards. So I know that this piece here will fold upwards quite nicely. However, this piece should also, so basically this entire face through here should fold outwards. So I think that's going to work. It's a pretty simple object. One catch for unwrapping before we unfold, I'm going to hold down the right mouse and go back to object mode. We should always freeze our transformations before we do this. So it's not always an issue. If I just come to the layer editor, the channel box, we can see we've got some more history, so I'm just going to delete history. What freezing transformations does is zero out these values. Now they are already zeroed out, but there's just an issue with Maya's unwrapping. It doesn't always unfold nicely unless you've clicked freeze transformations. So it's just a matter of going modify, freeze transformations, and we shouldn't see any change. And so now back in that 3D cut and sew tool, so the last tool I used, it's this sewing needles icon. So I'm in the 3D cut and sew. I'm still in edge mode. What I need to do here is hold down the right mouse, component, UV shell. I need to be in UV shell mode, and I need to select every UV shell. Because there's only one UV shell in this model, no, there's two, because I've cut out the whole base. So instead of selecting them like this, I want to drag over to make sure I get the entire model, so everything is selected, and I press D, the last letter of unfold, D. It thinks for a second, and because it's such a simple model, it doesn't think for very long, and it unwraps it, it unfolds it. In my UV toolkit, so these are the tools for working in this UV toolkit, I'm just going to open the last one, Arrange, and just click Orient Shells, so that just flattens them so that they're rotated flat. And now if I click Layout, it packs them into UV space. Now I'm just going to hit Q to get out of my 3D cut and sew, so that's the same as selecting the select tool. In here, I'm just going to, so on the UV side, hold down the right mouse and go to UV shell. I just don't like that these are right on top of each other, so I'm just going to manually move these and just put it about here. I might actually just grab both of them, hit the R tool for scale, and just scale them down a touch. So what this allows me to do, so I've just hit W and I can just click on these in UV shell mode. It lets me select them easily. Let's just position them to make sure we've got plenty of space. I might just rotate this so it's vertical. And, such a simple object, we can just manually position them. Actually, now that I've done that, we really do want our UV layouts to use as much of the available UV space as possible, because otherwise we're just wasting texture space or texel density. So we want all of this 0, 1, this checkered area to be full as much as we can get away with, but I'm intentionally leaving a little bit of a gap between them. So for such a simple object, that's fine. So now I'm going to object mode, and I want to export this. So I'll just get out of UV editing, and let's just save. So Control S, save, or I could incremental save. It's a good habit. File, save, scene as. I do this regularly on bigger projects, on real projects. this naming convention, just every now and then go save as and just increment that number. And so I'll end up with 01, 02, 03, etc. It's really useful, and it could really save yourself some hassle down the track. So now that I've made my model, we want to just clean it up a little bit. So delete history. I've got a shortcut here, just deletes history. So edit, delete all history. Same with freeze transformations, modify freeze transforms. Should be good. And let's export it. So I'm just going to go File, Export Selection, and pick what format I want. Now, FBX or OBJ is usually your preferred format. Now, if you don't have this option, it's just because the plugin isn't active. So just imagining I don't see this option, you need to just activate the plugin, which is really straightforward. It's just Windows, Settings Preferences, Plugin Manager, and what I'm looking for is FBX. And we can see this is already loaded, which is why I could see it. But if you couldn't see that, you need to tick this box and it will load. Ticking auto load means it will always be there. So because auto load is ticked, when I opened it up this time, I had that option. So it's just a little catch for beginners. Sometimes they can't export as FBX or OBJ because they haven't activated the plugin. So export selection, FBX. Oops. OBJ would actually be fine, but I'll go FBX, making sure I'm I understand what folder I'm in. Now, again, this is my Maya project folder. You can see what I've got in here is just these scenes. If this was going to be a lot of content, what I really should do is make a scenes folder. So what I'm going to do for this export is make a new folder and call it in here. Always incremental save. You might end up exporting this thing 10 times, so you need multiple file names to be able to track which is which. Don't just override every single time. So export selection. And so my scene, what I really should have done is File, Save Scene As, and I should have a folder in here called Scenes. And in here I would increment again. And so that's fine. So I'm done with Maya. So if we take a look just at what I did there, I've created these two folders. I'm just going to move the ramp into the scenes. So they're all in there. When I open Maya, I can tell it which files I want, and that will work just fine. And so now I want to go into Substance Painter. So here's a new project in Substance with nothing, it's just the default Substance. Nothing opened yet, so I'm going File, New. Now the template that I'm using, we know that we're going into the Unity game engine. So if I scroll down, we have options here for Unity. Sometimes you'll have multiple options depending on your install, so I'll just go with the one option I have for Unity. The document resolution, 2K is quite large for sort of a platformer type asset. Yeah, I might just reduce this to 1K. Just keep it nice and simple. The first option that I skipped over is the file, so I wanted to select my file. So select, navigate to my project, and I export it. You can see why it's useful to name things that make sense. It's very easy for me to find. Oh yeah, it's under export. So open. And I don't have any special textures, so I don't add those here. All I do is tell it what file, tell it what size I want, and hit OK. And so that's going to load my scene. And so again, we're in a 3D app. It's just like Maya, just holding down my Alt key to orbit, pan, and zoom. But what I want to do, before you ever start texturing inside of Substance, because I can start putting materials on, but they won't work correctly. What I need to do is bake textures, and we do that under the texture set settings. So if I click this, we can see it's this list of textures that it needs to work correctly don't have any textures loaded, they're empty. So what I need to do is get Substance to bake them for me. So I click Bake Mesh Maps. Okay, so 1K, and I don't need to do a whole lot more. I can tick this option, use the low poly as the high poly mesh. So what that means is I haven't made another mesh that's got a lot of detail that I'm baking onto the low poly. I'm just using the same mesh. In other words, I only have one mesh. Baking is a whole other topic that's a bit more advanced than a beginner tutorial. We can look at that later. So I'm not changing anything else. I'm leaving all of these settings. I'm clicking Bake Selected Textures. It goes through and quickly generates some maps. Because it's 1K, it's gone quite quickly. And you can see it's loaded all of these textures that it's just created into each channel. It needs these to work correctly. And so I've got my basic ramp, and now I can start texturing. I'm not going to do anything too tricky. Let's just add some kind of base metal, maybe a rough steel. I'm just going to drag it straight onto the model. So we've got an interesting steel there, and maybe what I want to do is add a fill layer on top. And so this fills the whole object. What I'll do with this fill layer is give it a color. Actually, what I might do, I just want to try, I've got a glossy plastic. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just use this plastic material that I put over the model. I was going to fill a similar sort of color. I can select on this layer, this plastic. All it is a material that's got some of these settings checked already. So we've got some information on the model. I'm just going to pick whatever color I want. I might change it to a hot orange, something like that will do. But I don't want this everywhere. I want it kind of faded. So I'm going to right click this layer and say, actually before, just if this is getting confusing, I made a fill layer, I'm just going to delete that. So this orange, I'm going to right click and add a black mask. So it disappears. It hasn't actually disappeared. What it's done is create a mask that where I start removing the mask, we can see that layer underneath. But you never want to paint straight on. If I wanted to hand paint it like this, a better way would be to add a paint layer. So then I can click on this paint layer and paint however I wanted. But I don't actually want to do a paint layer. What I want to do is right click and add a generator and just get Substance to create a mask for me. So I'll click on generator and let's see, I might go with metal edgeware. And so now I can use these sliders to start experimenting with the different kind of settings that I want. And you know, this isn't intended to be a detailed tutorial on how to use Substance. Again, the whole point of this tutorial is to show you the workflow for creating something and bringing it into Unity with textures. So, you know, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time adjusting it, even though it's very tempting to go to town on it. But we've got an asset that we can clearly see has texture material. We've got shininess. We've got a bump map on it, a normal map rather, and color, of course. So that's probably good enough for showing the workflow. So let's export this and bring it into Unity. The way to do that, now I've already got the 3D model, of course. We've already exported that out of Maya, and we've used it in here to texture this and see how it works. We're using that same model in Unity. But now what I need to do is just export these textures. So to export, I'm going to go File, Export Textures, and then I select the template. So from the template, there's a few options for Unity. What I want is not the HD render pipeline because we're keeping it simple. We just want the universal pipeline, and I can choose between metallic or specular. I'm going to go with metallic. It doesn't really matter which one I pick as long as I make sure I match this workflow in Unity. So I'll go with metallic, and I can take a look at the list of exports and you can see the different textures it's going to output. So the directory, I need to navigate to where I want. So I've created this folder. So again, inside my game project, completed assets, ramp, I'm going to put all of my textures in here. It's very important not to just put it into completed assets, but to actually have a name that's very clear just by reading. for each asset. So all my textures in my 3D model for the ramp will be in there, and for the box, all of the textures in the 3D model for the box will be in that one. So you want multiple locations, a separate location for each thing. So ramp, select folder. So it's based on the texture set size, which is 1K, and we're good to go. So I click export. If we take a look inside of this ramp project, we can see the 3 textures have been output. So we've got a normal map, which is giving us our bump detail. We've got the color called albedo, and we've got the metallic map. Now, I also want my 3D model inside of here. So I'm going to come back to Maya, to where I exported that model, and just copy it, Control C to copy, and make sure my completed assets ramp paste has it inside here. So I've got my 3D model plus my textures all in one easy to find location. So now we jump over to Unity,